employee was brought down from the cafeteria staff, janitorial staff, grounds crew. They're all here to see the Colts of Indianapolis win Super Bowl 41.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Just Say Guay. I'm your host, George Guay. I'm happily joined today by David Griffiths from Indianapolis. He's here to talk some NFL draft and Indianapolis Colts football. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, you got it, man. My pleasure.
Yeah, so before get the questions going, could you please just introduce yourself, where you're from, where you work, stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. Currently, I work at Fox 59 CBS 4 in Indianapolis. I've been here a bit more than 5 years now. I'm primarily a weekend sports anchor for Fox here, but you go back and forth. We do stuff for both channels, Fox and CBS. I anchor, I report. I basically do everything that's necessary to get a show on the air. Before here, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, a half an hour south of Philadelphia. Went to Syracuse University, majored in broadcast journalism, political science, and got my first job out of college back in 2007 in Bozeman, Montana. Stayed there for 3 years, did sideline reporting for Montana State football, worked for a local TV station out there, and moved to Tallahassee, Florida after that for the next 5 years of my life before eventually landing myself in Indianapolis. So that is the very, very quick version of how I got here.
Awesome. A lot of exciting stuff. Glad it's really worked out for you. So as a Patriots fan, I'm really excited about this year's draft because there's so many vacancies that the team need. As a college football fan, I'm very excited because I'm a Buckeye fan. I think this is a year where they're going to have a lot of picks. What are you most looking forward to in this draft?
Well, me as an Eagles fan, since I grew up half an hour south of Philadelphia, I'm looking forward to getting some wide receivers so that you don't have to pull guys right off the street and try to insert them in the lineup like they did last year. But from the Colts' perspective, it's really an open book. There's a lot of different ways that they could go. They already traded out of the first round, losing the 13th pick for DeForest Buckner from the 49ers. So you're not going to pick quite that high in the first round. But there's still just a lot of opportunity and a lot of room to wiggle, I guess. And that makes things exciting for me because I don't know what's coming. I could give you ideas of what I think could be coming, but at the end of the day, a little bit of the unknown is something that I'm excited about, just not knowing exactly what is going to be and trying my best to figure out what it is in the meantime before we finally realize it. And I think a lot of us are just missing that with sports in the current time we are, that there's that aspect of the unknown and just waiting for something to happen. And the NFL draft is hopefully going to whet our appetites a little bit for that.
Yeah, I'm very excited that even during this time we're getting some sort of big event. I know the NBA draft is not for another few months, but the NFL is the most popular league in the United States, so it's definitely going to get people excited. I'm sure the league is bummed out that it's not in Vegas this year because that's what the plans were, and I think that really would have made a great weekend out there. We saw how successful it even was, even in Nashville last year. So what were your thoughts on the season as a whole last year for the NFL? I mean, obviously Brady doesn't even go to the AFC title game, which we saw so many times. We saw Patrick Mahomes become a superstar in the playoffs as he is. Lamar Jackson got eliminated early. We didn't really see that coming. Do you think we could expect to see those two quarterbacks to try and hold on to the AFC for years to come?
Well, I think that they're certainly going to be in contention up there, and it depends on, of course, which quarterbacks go to the AFC this year, next year, the year after that. So, but you're absolutely going to have to go through one of those two guys, I would imagine, just because you have an MVP candidate in Lamar Jackson, you have an MVP candidate in Patrick Mahomes. Both of them are on teams that have really quality head coaches in Andy Reid and John Harbaugh. He used to coach under Andy Reid, in fact, in Philadelphia back when I was growing up there. So to answer your question succinctly, it would be yes, but at the same time, there's always guys that can join in immediately and hop right to the front of the line, so to speak. And that's part of what makes the NFL exciting. Sure, Tom Brady had his years as dominating the AFC and always getting to the championship year after year after year. But you had guys like a Ben Roethlisberger, who is just as quality of a quarterback and just as quality of a franchise that got there every once in a while and was able to knock him down. Peyton Manning in the same aspect here with the Colts or with the Broncos doing the same thing. So I think that, yes, probably both of those guys and Mahomes specifically with the Chiefs is probably in the best scenario to at least come as close as possible to matching what Brady could do. But it's going to be very difficult to do that. Just like here in Indy, we talk like it's very difficult for any team to do what the Colts were able to do in the 2000s with winning 10, 12 games every year, winning the division every year, always making the playoffs every year. Like that time is past because of the challenge that the AFC South kind of faces now with so much more talent in the South and better quarterbacks in the South. So it's just going to be more difficult to do what someone like the Colts did or what Tom Brady and the Patriots, like you mentioned earlier, would do. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see who's going to really run the AFC, especially all the guys that I grew up watching, Manning, Brady, Roethlisberger. They're not going to be there anymore in a couple of years, especially with how injury-prone Roethlisberger has become. So obviously one of the most successful running backs in the postseason this year was in the Colts division, Derrick Henry. The Titans placed a franchise tag on him. Recently, Christian McCaffrey gets a record-breaking contract. What are your thoughts on these running backs that get drafted high and they get paid as some of the highest-paid players in the league? Because, in my opinion, one thing I noticed is that both of the top running backs on the Super Bowl teams, both those running backs weren't drafted. Do you think that just shows how much of a passing league it is?
I think it's absolutely going that way. And the reason that Christian McCaffrey gets the deal that he gets, and the reason that I'm not quite as adverse to that deal as I am to some other running back deals, is because of who Christian McCaffrey is as a player. He's not just a running back. He is just as dangerous as a receiver. He lines up in the slot quite often. He can get easily 100 catches a year, and then also add on to that 175, 200 rushes at the same time. So he's a guy that it truly is valuable like that. Someone like from the past couple years, like a Todd Gurley or a Devontae Freeman or an Ezekiel Elliott getting those deals, as dangerous as those guys are, they are nowhere near the same player, the same threat as Christian McCaffrey. So for NFL teams to devote that much of their salary cap to a running back, he had better be a special, special player. And really at running back right now, there are very few in the NFL that I think I would put up there on that level. Very, very few. You'd much rather spend your money on a quarterback. You'd much rather spend your money on an offensive line protecting that quarterback and a defensive line to get after the opposing quarterback. All those things I think are far more important than running backs. We've seen guys at running back come in and have an impact on the league quickly. So I think the learning curve is perhaps a little bit less for running backs right now in terms of what they're asked to do and the ability that they're able to incorporate themselves into an NFL offense. So yes, you brought up the two teams that made the Super Bowl and the running backs that they have. I don't think that's a coincidence. But at the same time, the 49ers also, they had on their roster last year a guy named Jerick McKinnon who wasn't playing at the time because he was hurt, and he was still one of the top 4 or 5 paid running backs in the league. So it's still, you're still able to make it to the Super Bowl in those situations if your salary cap and your spending works out and you can get there. But I don't think it's going to be the path to success looking at the next 10 years of the league.
Yeah, I just thought the interesting thing was when the Chiefs made the decision to get rid of Kareem Hunt, it's just a lot of Patriots fans are saying, oh my goodness, we can totally beat them to get to the Super Bowl again. And to be honest, it made really no difference with Kansas City. They still won the Super Bowl. And you figure if most teams took away a vital player off their roster, it would have a huge impact. But, in reality, Chiefs were better. And I think that's speaks a lot to the Chiefs. So obviously the Colts did have a first-round pick. They were at 13, but they traded it away. They do have a high second-round pick. What do you think? Where do you see them going with that?
They need to get a wide receiver at some time during this draft. T.Y. Hilton's great. I love T.Y. Hilton, but he's on the other side of 30 right now. He doesn't have quite as many years left. After T.Y., you have Paris Campbell, former Ohio State Buckeye. And as much as people are intrigued by Campbell, he had 4, I think, injuries last year that caused him to miss time here and there. So he's quickly earning himself an injury-prone tag, even if that's only 1 year and it might be unjustified, I think, at this point. I'm intrigued to see what he can do. He's also fumble-prone last year as well. He had a couple fumbles that were not good fumbles. So you can't say, oh, yeah, we have Paris Campbell. We're fine as a second threat. You can't do that. Zach Pascal was a guy for the Colts who came in and performed very, very well, better than expected in a third wide receiver role. But he's not a game-breaking, game-changing wide receiver that you can rely on to go deep and beat a defense over the top. So I think somewhere around 34, you're looking for one of two things. Either, like I mentioned, a wide receiver, a guy that can do some damage, whether that's a T. Higgins of Clemson, Denzel Mims, Michael Pittman Jr., guys like that. Or perhaps if you have a guy that you have targeted there at the top of the second round, that you have a second-round grade on, who is a quarterback of the future that you want to sit for at least 1 year, perhaps 2, and mold him behind Phillip Rivers and Jacoby Brissett this year, and then we'll see what happens down the line. Those are probably your two options for what you're looking at 34, if indeed the Colts decide to stay at 34. Chris Ballard said this week specifically that he is looking to acquire more picks. One thing he always says year after year, I love them picks. And so if he has the opportunity to move back in the draft and acquire another pick either in this draft or the next draft, certainly wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think they're going to give Phillip Rivers the keys to the offense. I mean, that's why they brought him in. They gave him that big contract. Brissett's a great backup right now. I think whoever goes into the Colts quarterback room is going to have a good experience before he really steps into the starting position. Are there any quarterbacks you specifically like? I mean, it's a very deep quarterback draft. Some of a few of the top 10 picks are going to be a quarterback. Obviously, number 1 with Joe Burrow, Justin Hebert, and Tua. Are there any guys you think that could find their way to Indianapolis?
None of those top guys, especially when the Colts traded away their 13th pick, which I thought was still a very good decision to run the defense you want to run. You need a good 3 technique right there on the line. DeForest Buckner is one of the best in the league. So it was a good move, a wise move to do that, especially if you don't think you can trade into the top 5 and get a quarterback specifically that you want, like the specific guy that you want. So from the Colts perspective, they're not getting one of those big guys, one of those big name guys. I like Tua. I like Burrow. After that, the kid from Oregon, the kid from Utah State, I'm not quite as sold on those two as first-round quarterbacks. And in terms of second-round quarterbacks, the guys that I've seen, at least in different mock drafts around there, like Jake Fromm, Jacob Eason, Jalen Hurts, they're all intriguing for their own ways, but they also have things that, of course, are red flags, and that's why they're not projected to be a top 5, top 10 player, off the draft board this year. So, if I had to pick a second-round quarterback, which is kind of a weird position to be in, but nevertheless, if I had to pick somebody, I'd probably pick Jalen Hurts. From the Colts' perspective, especially because you can say you don't want him to play at all next year. You can sit him and let him develop more as a passer. He has the arm talent to be an NFL quarterback. He has the escapability in terms of being kind of the wave of the future quarterback. He's not a statue in the pocket like some other guys there are, especially Eason, Fromm to an extent as well. So I just like the different things that Hurts would allow you to do in breakdown scenarios, that you can't just rely, as great as the Colts offensive line is, you can't just rely on a perfect pocket every time. So I'd much rather have a guy who can escape and cause something to happen after he gets out of the pocket than a guy who's just stuck there and really can't do anything out of the pocket. So that's a long way to answer your question. But if I was the Colts, perhaps a guy like a Jalen Hurts would be intriguing to me, but who knows where they have him on their board.
So someone that I keep reading about that could go really late, I was wondering if your opinion on him, if you've read anything about him, is Anthony Gordon from Washington State. Led the Pac-12 in touchdowns and yards per game. Obviously, the interceptions are very high with him. Could you see someone like going to Indianapolis because they could find him late in the rounds? Phillip Rivers and Brissett could polish him up for a couple of years and really turn those mistakes into more touchdowns.
Perhaps. I don't know much about Gordon myself. I haven't done a deep dive on all the quarterbacks in this class. I've looked more at the first and second round guys, of course, because that's probably the ones that are the most intriguing from a Colts fan's perspective. If like, the Colts are in a position, you point out, to really sit a guy, at least for 1 year. But that's the problem. It's only for 1 year that you're locked in to be able to sit a guy if you're the Colts. You have Phillip Rivers on a 1-year contract. Jacoby Brissett has 1 year left in his contract. And by bringing in Phillip Rivers, the Colts basically said they don't want Jacoby Brissett to be their starter for the long term. As much as they keep saying, Frank Reich and Chris Ballard saying, we do like Jacoby, that's why he's still on the roster. Well, congratulations. You traded for another quarterback to start in front of him, so you obviously don't like him that much. So Jacoby's not your guy in the future, so they're not going to sign him after this year. If they do, it would be at an extreme discounted rate just to be a backup quarterback. And Rivers, you don't know if he's going to come back next year right now. He's only wanting to sign a 1-year deal because he doesn't know how much he has left in the tank. If everything goes well, sure, they bring him back for another year, and then you can sit a guy for 2 years. But if you're drafting a guy that late in the draft, a 5th round, a 6th round, a 7th round pick, you don't want to play him for at least 1 year. You definitely don't want to play him in that first season. 2 seasons would be great to put him behind anybody if you want to develop him, but you never draft somebody in the 6th round like Tom Brady was at 199th overall, expecting him to be your quarterback of the next 10 years. You don't do that. That's just not something that teams do. If you expect, hey, this guy's going to be our quarterback for the next decade, you're taking him in the 1st round. You're taking him in the 2nd round. So guys back there are taken to try to be your backup for the future, honestly. A guy that you can mold into somebody that can win games if worse comes to worse when your star quarterback gets knocked out with an unfortunate injury. So you bring up those guys late in the draft, and you certainly can't rely on them to be your guy of the future. So if indeed the Colts take them, that's not a sign that, hey, we love this guy so much that he's going to be our quarterback. It's a sign that, hey, we need somebody to be a backup perhaps next year if Phillip Rivers is gone, if Jacoby Brissett is gone. So that's what I think about late-round quarterbacks.
Okay, sounds good. So how excited are you for Phillip Rivers? Because, I mean, new environment for him, completely different city. He's not in LA anymore. I think he's obviously coming to a better football town where he'll be more appreciated. And, he's not in the shadow of the Lakers or even the Rams at this point. He's way better offensive line, better team. What do you think his ceiling is performance-wise?
I think his ceiling can be what he did 2 years ago with the Chargers for sure. I don't know if last year was an aberration or if last year was the first step down the end of a career for a guy who's kind of a fringe Hall of Famer after his career in the league. So I'm optimistic that he'll be better than he was last year. I think the Colts certainly plan for that if they're bringing him in on the contract that he is. And you mentioned, I think, probably the key in bringing him here, why I think that he'll have a better season than he did a year ago, and that's the offensive line. The Colts' offensive line is easily one of the top 3 offensive lines in the NFL. Anthony Costanzo is one of the most underrated left tackles in the league. Quentin Nelson is one of the best 2 guards in the league. And Ryan Kelly is a Pro Bowl caliber center as well right in front of him. So that entire left side of the offensive line is elite, elite, elite. And the right side isn't a slack either. So you have the Chargers' offensive line last year was, I'll put it nicely, it was less than good. And that's all I'll leave it at that for that line. So Phillip Rivers is going to have significantly more time to work. He's going to have his former coach in Frank Reich, who's probably a better offensive mind than anybody he had out there in San Diego / Los Angeles, I guess it is now, to design plays and get the ball to. Keenan Allen is a tremendous receiver. Mike Williams is a great receiver. So I think if you look at the weapons, he might have even had better weapons out in San Diego. So T.Y., like I said here, is great. Jack Doyle, the tight end, is really good, but he's 8.6 yards per catch, Jack Doyle. He's not a real threat to go deep. Like I said earlier, the Colts need a deep threat. The Colts could possibly use a big target like a Mike Williams that Rivers had last year with the Chargers to be a go-up-and-get-it guy, because that's kind of what Eric Ebron was for the Colts. That's what they planned for Devin Funchess to be last year when he got injured first week and then missed the entire rest of the season. So that's kind of a glaring hole right now that Rivers has seemingly always had with the Chargers, whether it was Tyrell Williams or you could even go further back than that, Dontrell Inman. Maybe not the exact same mold Dontrell Inman, but that's the idea. It's not exactly the same level, I don't think, of weapons around him, but that's what the draft, I think, is going to be for.
Yeah, I'm excited for him too. I mean, I'm excited that it's a new change of scenery. I mean, at some point you just want to get out and go somewhere new. Obviously, it's what Tom Brady did. And, Philip Rivers has really put a lot of heart and soul into the game. I'm really happy that he can go out winning football games. So you mentioned Quentin Nelson, probably one of the top 2 guards in the whole NFL. He's been an all-pro at age 24 twice. Just talk about his development over the last few years and how much better do you think he can get?
I think the ceiling is still a little bit ahead of him right now. When you're his age, you're still getting used to everything that comes with the NFL. So you have your head can only get so full with all the newness and all the challenges that present itself that are on the field and off the field in the league. So defenses are obviously more tricky. Defensive players are obviously better. And so it just takes a little bit of time until you really you get in a groove. And offensive linemen, they could go for a long time. I mean, thinking back to myself growing up, guys like Anthony Munoz played ages and was still fantastic late in his career. Bruce Matthews, stellar late in his career. Jonathan Ogden, great. Even right now with my team Philadelphia, like I said, that I grew up watching. Jason Peters has had tremendous years as a left tackle late in his career. So the older you get, just the more wise you get. And it seems like these guys can, if possibly, assuming nothing terrible happens to them with gruesome injuries, but you can keep yourself healthy enough, you can keep yourself strong enough to still be an elite player well into your 30s. And that's kind of what Anthony Costanzo is going through right now for the Colts as well. He just turned 30 a year or two ago, I think. He's 31 or 32, and now is going by one-year contracts. But for Quentin Nelson specifically, I think his best football is still ahead of him, even with 2 all-pro nods like you mentioned already. It might not be that much better football if you look at it, but I think the average fan doesn't know the first thing about guard play in the NFL and what makes a good guard or a bad guard. They just think, oh, he has to be strong and be able to punch somebody and stay out of the way, But it's obviously more complicated than that, or else anybody who's a big guy could do it. And Quentin's a smart guy. He is a big, strong guy. So I'm certainly intrigued to see where his career takes him. There's a little way to go up, I think, still, but nevertheless, I think you'd take what he's given you the past 2 years and run with that, even if this is the ceiling.
Yeah, he's definitely going to play a big role in the success of Philip Rivers. So obviously, you guys make a couple additions on the defensive side of the ball. The trade between you guys and the 49ers with the first-round pick, signed Xavier Rhodes. It's going to really help in the secondary. How much do you think he can help to the secondary, given that statistics-wise, it was in the bottom half of the passing game?
Yeah, Xavier Rhodes is an interesting player. I knew him actually in Tallahassee when I worked there, and he went to Florida State at the time. Mm-hmm. He's kind of, I don't want to say infamous, that might not be the right word, but he's definitely a name that Colts fans know because he was the player who was drafted right after Bjorn Werner back in that draft. I think it was 2013, or maybe it was 2014 draft. Or 2015. I don't know, one of those 3 years. But and Bjorn did not turn into the best possible selection for the Colts here in Indianapolis. But anyway, for Rhodes, I think the Colts brought him in at a great discount from what they were going to pay a guy who was on the roster named Pierre Desir. Desir is a okay cornerback. He was the Colts' Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee last year, so he's a great guy in the community. He had a down year. He had some injuries, but the Colts were going to pay him like $6 million if they had to keep him on the roster, so they let him go. They brought in Xavier Rhodes, who is at least at the same caliber, probably better if you take him at his best, who's also been damaged by injuries the past couple years. So you get him for $2 or $3 million. You save $2 or $3 million, and so it comes into being a cap casualty move. It's at worst, it's a wash. At best, it's a bit of an upgrade. Rhodes played more man than he did zone, I believe, but he still played some zone. And the Colts play a little bit of both here and there. maybe more zone than man. So, yeah, I mean, it's obviously a different scheme that they're trying to work him into here. It's to be determined, really, how he does. I think the Colts coaching staff brought him in because they're optimistic that, kind of like Phillip Rivers, he's more like the guy of 3 years ago than he was specifically like he was last year for various circumstances. So one thing the Colts do need, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and this is something that General Manager Chris Ballard said in his postseason press conference back at the beginning of January, is they need more veteran leadership. They didn't have a guy who could stand up in the locker room and call somebody out or call a team out and rile them up. And I don't know if Xavier Rhodes is that type of guy. When I knew him in Tallahassee, he wasn't the loudest type of player. But maybe he developed into that during his, I don't know how many years it's been, 7, 8, 9 years in the NFL now for him. Not totally sure. But for sure, the Colts need some kind of help in the secondary, especially after letting Desir go. So if you have Xavier Rhodes, you have your second-round pick from last year, Rock Yassin, you have Kenny Moore, who's one of the highest-paid slot cornerbacks in the NFL. There's your top three. And after that, you got a couple of young developmental guys. Maybe you add a guy or two in this year's draft, and you see where that takes you. So secondary is certainly a position with the Colts, and quarterback specifically, that's the cake is still in the oven, as they might say. There's still some work left to go with these guys.
Yeah, it should be an interesting season. So I thought he was going to go to the Patriots, but they went with the McCourty twins for a couple more years. Either way, good picks. But so even though the offensive line was a great part of last season, what's another thing that you thought that went well that can be carried into this season?
Oh, boy. A couple of individual things. Marlon Mack had a really good year because he stayed healthy for the most part. I think the Colts have a great running back in him, just so long as when his contract is up, they don't pay him too much, like we were talking about earlier. I'd love to see Marlon Mack. I think Colts fans would love to see Marlon Mack continue to be their running back of the future. Another backup running back, Nyheim Hines, finally developed into a punt returner near the end of the year, returned a couple punts for touchdowns against the Panthers, I think it was in Week 16. And when they drafted him, Hines, they had hoped that he would be their returner. And then his first preseason, he couldn't hang on to the ball. And he fumbled 2 or 3 times. And then he hit the bench. If you can't hang on to the ball, you're not going to be the returner. But they finally slotted him back into that position at the end of last year. And he really was off and running, no pun intended. After that, a guy like Kamoko Toure, who is a young defensive end, had 5 or 6 really solid games at the beginning of last year before he got knocked out for the rest of the season in that win over the Chiefs in Kansas City. So I think that was very encouraging to see some development on the defensive line. And guys like Darius Leonard and Quentin Nelson proved they weren't just one-hit wonders, that they were both all-pro level players. Darius, of course, a will linebacker, and then Quentin on the offensive line. So whenever you have guys that you draft and they immediately are gangbusters, amazing players, that's awesome that you have 1 year, but you'd like to see them do it again the next year before you can certainly certify them as guys that you build your franchise around, and those two are certainly those type of guys.
Very well said. So obviously this is a topic that really changed the whole league for the next couple of years. Tom Brady going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One of the teams that was in the mix from reports was the Indianapolis Colts. And from a Patriots fan perspective, when he became a free agent, we all thought, okay, he's going to pick the place where he can build his business up and then where his wife would want to live. And we thought it'd be L.A., potentially New York, because that's where he moved his family. But he chose Tampa Bay. And it really made the fans' perspective from New England think, oh, maybe he just wanted to go where it was a better football fit. I was thinking from the start it was going to be either Tennessee, Indy, or Los Angeles. So what would you think happened with Indianapolis when he was in the mix with them?
I find it very, very difficult to believe that Tom Brady in Indianapolis ever would have worked. People here do not like Tom Brady. He is not just a guy that people like. There are guys who are quarterbacks like a Phillip Rivers is a perfect example, honestly, for the Colts. He had a couple of really significant wins over them, either in the playoffs or in the regular season, that were heart-crushing for Colts fans losses. And he would jaw, like he's famously jawed with fans in the stands here while they got like this last-second victory at Lucas Oil Stadium. I don't think it was the RCA Dome. I think it was Lucas Oil Stadium. Yeah. But Tom Brady is different. He's not just a quarterback that has beaten this team a couple times. He's a quarterback that people in this town hate. He's a quarterback that people in this town think has cheated his way to the top. It would not have gone well for the franchise if they brought him in to be their quarterback. I think there would have been some aspect of the fan base that would have been okay with it, but not a significant group of the fan base.
Not for the diehards.
No, seriously. And Indianapolis is still a town that, like, it's a good football town. I'll tell you this. Like, it's different now than it was before Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning made it more of a football town. Before Manning, it was a racing town and a college basketball town and a Pacers town. Undoubtedly, the Colts were second, third, fourth fiddle at best. Now the Colts are challenging for that number one spot for sure. But it's not the same type of town that Chicago is as a football town, as Philadelphia is, as New York is, as Boston is as a football town, or Providence, Rhode Island as well. So it's not the same generational type fans, but so maybe there would have been more of a case to make that Tom Brady could have worked here, that there wasn't that same exact type of vitriol in the fan base. Like, I think from my perspective, there's no way that Troy Aikman ever would have worked in Philadelphia. It couldn't have happened. 0% chance.
No, the fans wouldn't let him get off the plane.
Exactly. And they probably would have he wouldn't have made it out of the tunnel in Philadelphia in one piece, probably, as he came out. So it's in that type of vein that I really don't think Tom Brady would have worked here in Indianapolis. As much as reports say it might have been considered, as much as coaches and even GMs would say, you know what, we've looked at all options for this. It was not a significantly serious discussion, I don't think, at any point this offseason.
Yeah, it's just very interesting for how it happened with us, because as Brady got towards the end of his time with the Patriots, people were really mad about how much he really valued his business, the TB12 method, and how his wife didn't really like living in Boston. So it kind of gave the implication, okay, he's going to go to a place where she would really want to live and he could grow his business. I felt that Tampa really went back on all those promises and what he valued. I think that even though he wanted to get out of New England, I think Tampa was just also the football fit, because, you know, Mike Evans, Bruce Arians is a good coach. It's a warm city. I think that's what happened, if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, probably. I'm not privy to the inner workings of Tom Brady's mind, having never covered him specifically in my life. But obviously, the warm climate in Tampa, I'm sure, was part of the reason. He spent a whole lot of time in the cold, whether it was at Michigan or at New England. And as a guy myself who has spent time in the cold at Syracuse University, one of the snowiest cities in the country, and then at Bozeman, Montana, one of the coldest cities in the country, I can understand wanting to head to a place like I did to Tallahassee, Florida for a couple years, or what Tom might want to do, head to Tampa for a couple years before he kind of fades off into the sunset. So that's the only insight I can give you, is that living in Tampa, the quality, quote unquote, of living might be a little bit better than it is there in Boston 365 days a year.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be interesting, because Boston sports fans are so used to seeing him throughout the first pitch at a crowded Fenway Park cheering his name, and now he's going to be at Tropicana Field with probably half the stadium empty. So that'll be weird. But last question, then we'll go. So obviously what's going on in the world right now is really slowing down sports. It's not looking good for the NBA or NHL, but NFL, there's some hope that they might be able to play games with no fans. Do you think they can save the season? I mean, it's hard with the rookies. They can't even go to rookie minicamp. They can't come to the team. There's no OTAs as of right now. Do you think this can happen?
Yeah, they'll get something in this year for sure. Unless there are significant steps backward from here looking forward, I can't imagine a scenario where this NFL season is completely defunct. With just looking at things, how things have gone so far, we're at a point where things are bad for sure. But we're only 1 month into this, Like let's put this in perspective. There are still months until the regular season begins in the NFL. There is so much time for things to go down. There is so much time for things to open back up. It is much less likely that the NBA gets a little bit more of a regular season and postseason in, obviously, than there is the NFL. And I've been on talks with Pacers Pacers president Kevin Pritchard about that recently, saying the NBA wants to come back with a little bit of regular season as kind of a tune-up and then the playoffs. I'm like, I don't know how much time.
They also want they want a 1-month training camp.
Right, and he said
that's
that
a lot of time.
Yeah, like that would. If you want to push back everything for next year too, and push back the draft and push back your off-season workouts and push back next year's start, then maybe you might be able to work something like that. But yeah, it's for the NFL. This, not that there's a good time ever for this to happen, but the NFL was sitting in the best possible position of all the major sports leagues for when this happened, because you can still do a lot of the things that you're normally doing: free agency, draft. Just change things up a little bit and make it virtual, and you do it online. And so you can't, unfortunately, go to Vegas, which would have been a heck of a show, I'm positive. But at the time, the only thing you're missing right now is bringing your players in for OTAs. I think that was supposed to really be April 20th was the first day the players on teams with continuing head coaches would be allowed to come in and begin, the off-season training program. That's not going to happen. Rookie minicamp's not going to happen. So I think players who are rookies this year will be at a little bit more of a disadvantage than they have been in the past. That's not to say that some rookies won't come, assuming we have a season, and have great years. I'm sure they will. But it's going to be much more difficult as a whole for rookies to come in and have an impact in their first years because they don't have that hands-on instruction. They're not there at the team facilities with the head coaches or the assistant coaches critiquing your every move on a day-to-day basis. So, it is going to be more of a challenge for rookies that way. But to get back to your question, even if the NFL shortens itself a little bit, I would be hard pressed to imagine a scenario where there is absolutely no NFL season this year.
Well, I think that's a good answer. I hope there's a season 2. We'll hope for the best. But I really appreciate you for coming on my show, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, dude, sounds good. Appreciate you having me.
Yep, have a good one. Thanks, guys.